Now before starting about the linking, you should understand why linking is required. So I'm not going to get into details of the Java programming language at a very high depth. I'll just tell you what is required. See, there is a class, let us say the class name is maybe main class. We shall talk about it in detail later, and inside this there is a method main. Okay, so you are going to have a static method main, and when you start it, first thing is you are supposed to give, in order to run the program, you are supposed to give the Java interpreter. So you have to compile it. Okay, so let us say the compilation is done. Now in order to run this, Java interpreter has to be given the class name of the class which contains the main method. So which means, let us say this is the class in our example which is containing the main method. So main method means this main function. Okay, now this one has to be given to JVM. Now JVM will first load only this class, nothing else. So only this class will be loaded. Okay, now it will start executing the lines one by one, and let us say at some point you have used a new class, something like this, a string, a new class. Okay, now and some code is written. So at this point what compiler will do is, before you run this, you have already compiled it. Remember, you have already used Java C, right, which means Java compiler you have used and you have compiled it. Now Java compiler will replace this name with a symbol. Okay, any class name which is not present here, it will be replacing it with a symbol. Okay, now this symbol, why is it replacing with a symbol is, actually it doesn't know where this class is, where the code that you have written, right? So in order to get this, you have to go into the class, but then it doesn't know as of now where it is. It will just replace with the symbol. Now it is the responsibility of our class loader to search for this particular class. Therefore class loader will start searching for this particular class first in the standard library. So in case if it is present in the standard library, it is going to, you will know that it is present in the standard library, and as a hint you are supposed to give where it is present inside the standard library. Okay, if it is not present here, you are supposed to give where it is present in the standard library. Then compiler will just give it a hint that it is present in this path. Compiler will check whether it is present in this path or not. So compiler will do a bit more, replacing it with a symbol, and this symbol will nothing but what is the path at which it is present. So that is what it is going to say. Now how will the Java compiler know that it is present here? You have to include some lines, I'll tell you later. So it is called some import, and then something is there, don't worry about it. Now using this symbol which Java C has added, which means the compiler has added, now the loader will start working. So loader will first get into the system library and it will search for this particular class. If it has found it, let us say it found the particular class you are talking about, then it is going to load that class. Okay, so it is going to load that class. So where it will be loaded, this entire memory is nothing but the method area. Inside the method area, that class will be loaded. Now once it is loaded, it is going to get an address, isn't it, the starting address. That starting address will be replaced, right? And so we can start executing this particular code only after loading is done. Okay, let us say loading is done, then replacing this symbol with this address, okay, is called as linking. Or you can simply see that this code is now linked to this code. That is why the name linking is they have invented. So linking is nothing but replacing such symbolic references. These are called as symbolic references. In most of the programming languages, first whenever there is a function call, or whenever there is a reference, or whenever there is a call made to a code which is not in this file, compilers will simply replace them with a symbolic name, and later linkers will try to link it with the actual code when they find them. Okay, now in Java what is happening, initially the compiler will just replace it with a symbolic name, and later the class is going to be loaded by the Java this loader. So first only this class is going to be loaded, and while executing it, whenever there is we need some other class, then dynamically that class will be loaded. Okay, that is why this is called as dynamic loading as well as dynamic linking. So in some other programming languages, loading will be done statically. Statically means before we start running a program, all the required code will be loaded and then we start the running. But here, after we start running the program, we are actually loading the code. That is why it is dynamic loading. And also, if you look at this, the linking is also done dynamically. If the loading is dynamic, you cannot link statically. So it has to be done definitely dynamically. But then there are some other languages where static linking is also done, which means before you start the program, we load the entire code and then we do the appropriate linking and then we start the execution. So once we start the execution, there is no need to stop the program in order to do the linking. But here in Java, even after we start executing, we have to stop the program from executing and we have to link it and again continue. Okay, so as of now, these are the basics that I want you to understand before I talk about linking. Okay, let's see about linking now. Okay, now let's see what are the various things linker will do. So once the loading is over, let us say a module is missing, a class is missing, and you have asked the loader to find the class. Now what will loader do? It will search in the entire all the given paths, like in system library, extension, as well as in the application program. It will try to find out where the particular class, and then it will just load it. It will not do anything else other than that. Okay, now after the loading is done, it is the responsibility of the linker to check whether that particular class is in a correct format or not. Every byte code, whenever you convert a .java file to a .class file by compiling, that will have a certain format. The file will have a certain format using which the JVM will be able to understand it. Now we have to verify whether that particular .class file is in that format or not. And sometimes we have to even do some security checking, which means if we have to even verify whether this Java class file is doing something which we don't want, right? Maybe if it is trying to access your passwords, or if it is trying to access some confidential files, you don't want that to happen. Okay, that everything will be done by the verification. Now if it is not either in the format, or if it is doing something are not exceptional or unexpected, then a error will be thrown. Now in Java, whenever you get an error during the execution, that is called as a runtime exception, or it is called as a exception. Okay, a runtime error is nothing but an exception in Java. We shall see about the exceptions later and how to handle them, but for now you understand that if verification fails, you get an exception. And then prepare. So after verification is done, now inside that newly loaded class, so what happens is some of the variables might be static variables. Now all those static variables which are present inside the class, they will be given some. Okay, what is a static variable? Don't worry about it now. Later we shall see in detail what is a static variable and what happens when you have a static variable. But for now, assume that already there is a static variable in the class. Now what we should do? So we are going to allocate and assign default values for the static variables. For example, you have loaded a class, let us say, and the class name is some Ravi. Now inside that there is a static variable int I. Now for that integer I, which is static, some memory has to be allocated, and along with that, inside that allocated memory, default value 0 will be stored. Now what is the default value? That varies from type of the variable to type of the variable, right? Later we shall see what are the default values for various types of variables. For now, understand that if there is a static variable, then memory is allocated at this point in time. Okay, when is memory allocated? At the runtime, when after loading. Okay, now that after that, the resolve phase is going to happen. Resolve means the symbolic memory references, which means inside the program earlier, when the required class was not there, whenever that class was needed, we had a symbolic reference on the board. I just discussed about it, right? So there is a symbolic reference. Now that symbolic reference will finally be replaced with the original reference from the method area. which means in the method area when this class is loaded, you now know what is the address of this class. Now that address can be actually replaced. So this is the place where the linking is completed. So at this point the linking is completed. Loading is done, now linking is done, and then a small part is remaining which is called as initialization. Now let's see what happens at initialization. Now whenever there are some let us say static variables, I told you that these static variables are going to be assigned with default values, but then sometimes they might be in the code, there might be different initializations. Let us say int I equal to 10 is there, static int I equal to 10 is there. Now I is initialized to 0 because it is a default value, but the user wants to initialize it to 10. Then at this point in time, before starting execution, again it will be replaced with 10. So finally, before continuing the program, right, which means let us say the program has stopped and loader is called. Now loader has loaded the program and then linked the program, and now it will initialize it and again return back to the program execution, which means before returning back to the program execution, finally the variables, all the variables will be initialized. Okay, see this initialization. This is the final phase of the class loading. Here all the static variables will be assigned with the original values. Original values means whatever value the programmer wants to assign to them, that is called as original values. And static block will be executed. So before executing the actual program, static block will execute and then the actual program will resume. Okay, now what is a static block? Don't worry about it now, later I'll tell you what it is. Every class, I mean in some classes there is a chance that a piece of code will be written inside a block and that block will be named as static. Now there is a rule that whenever a class is having the static block, now whenever you load the class for the first time, that particular code has to be executed before you start with the other code. Okay, so later when we talk about the static keyword, we shall see what are static variables and what are static blocks and why are they useful. For now you understand that whenever there is a static block, it will be executed at this point in time. So again we shall visit the same part later when we are discussing about static. Don't worry about it if you didn't understand this. Again I'm saying, if you are not able to understand anything that I'm talking now, later by the end of the course you will be able to understand it at a very high depth. Okay, fine.